No one compelled you to produce this statement. You did that of your own accord?
Yes.
Mr. Voller, there's some serious stuff on your criminal history, is there not?
Yes.
You've committed some serious offences?
Yep.
And it's a long criminal history as well, isn't it? There are a lot of entries on it.
Yep.
Can I ask you two questions? First of all, in relation to all those entries on your criminal history, has it ever been the case that you entered a plea of not guilty but were then found guilty, or have you always entered pleas of guilty to your offences?
I've always pleaded guilty.
And when you look at your criminal history now and reflect on it, what do you have to say about it?
Well, I'm definitely not proud of it, and it's just humiliating and a lot of mistakes that I made. And I'm sorry for it, but I've done it already.
All right. In your statement prior to that paragraph, you give some brief details of your life, and in particular of your life before you started committing any offences. And at paragraphs 15 and 16, you talk about ADHD and the fact that you were diagnosed with that, or at least you were told that you had that condition. Is that right?
Yes.
You also speak about use of the drug Ritalin to treat that condition.
Yep.
Can I ask you just to tell the Commissioners a bit more about your experience at that time and your treatment for ADHD and the effect that that had on you?
Well, when I was going to school, or the school I was at that time would refuse me to go to school unless in that morning I would take that medication at morning and lunch, and if I didn't take it, they'd kick me out of school and say you're not welcome at school. And eventually I left that school, and I think it got suspended because that medication I was taking made me sick. So although it helped a little bit with my concentration, at the end of the day I'd have a loss of appetite and I'd be vomiting all afternoon because of those medications that would make me sick.
We're talking at the moment about a period when you're about 10 years old, is that right?
Yes.
And as a result of that inability to medicate that condition, or as a result of that condition, or for whatever reason, you indicate that it was this period when you received your last proper schooling. Is that correct?
Yes.
When you're about 10 years old?
Yep.
Mr. Voller, there are different headings in your statement, and sometimes I'll ask you to give evidence under those headings. One of those relates to your early involvement with the Department of Children and Families, or DCF as it's called. In paragraph 22, you speak about an experience that you had at around about that time at a place called Forest House. Can you tell the Commission about that?
So me and my sister were put there for a reason. There was a few other fellas there, older fellas.
Was your sister older or younger than you, Mr. Voller?
Older than me, yeah, only 3 years. And there was a few older fellas there. They were about 16, 15, 17, and most of them were all smoking marijuana and just behaving poorly there. And then they were encouraging me to just like hang around with them, smoke marijuana and do that stuff. And I guess at that place they wouldn't get in trouble for it because they could sneak that stuff in.
How old were you? Maybe about 13, would that be right?
A bit younger.
Bit younger?
Yeah.
Okay. And the older boys were 15, 16, 17, is that so?
Yeah.
You mentioned marijuana.
Yeah.
Was there anyone disciplining or stopping people from from using it, or was there any enforcement?
There was rule that they weren't allowed to do it, but
No.
they just go in their room, close the door and sit in there, do it with the back window open, but there wasn't anything stopping them from getting it inside.
These older boys that you met at this time, did they have another influence on you as well?
Yeah, further down the track, I ended up, the first time I ever went to custody, one of those boys was in there and he was encouraging me to actually ask to go to Dondale. So he ended up influencing me into asking to go to Dondale, and ever since then I got into a bit of trouble with him inside custody and outside of custody.
Meaning that you committed some offences with him?
Yes.
With someone you met at this place that you were put into?
Yeah.
You, in part 2.1 of your statement, talk about places in which you've been detained, and later on we'll discuss some things that happened at Dondale and at the Alice Springs Youth Detention Centre. But you speak first about a place called Aranda House in paragraph 34. Is that right?
Yes.
Where was that?
In Alice Springs, down in the Todd River.
Can you describe the conditions that you lived in at Aranda House?
Well, it was really small. It had only a small little tiny area that you could play basketball. They had a small kitchen, but in that kitchen you wouldn't cook meals really. It'd just be microwave meals that you pull out the freezer, put in the microwave, and that's what you get. Same with the lunches. It wouldn't be cooked lunches. It would just be normal lunches. They had a tiny little TV room. When visits come in, you just have to either sit in the kitchen or sit out in that little in the little area where the basketball hoop is, with all the other inmates looking at your visits, or they could even talk to your visits, even come out and interact with your visits, so even if they didn't know them.
What about the rooms? Or where did you sleep?
They were small, so the rooms had 2 metal bed frames on it with a mattress on it, a toilet with a water bubbler that you could drink out of, and a tiny little window up on the wall, but the windows had all been painted over so that you couldn't see out the windows.
So was there any natural light in the room?
Only the tiny little tiny little door window, but you hardly get any light over that, because outside where the basketball court is, there's wires over the roof with shade cloths, so you don't get light coming through that area either, because there's wires with shade cloths stopping the sun from coming out.
Do you remember how it made you feel to live in those sorts of conditions?
It was disgusting because there was cockroaches, dust, and felt trapped. You couldn't really talk to anyone. The only really things that you get from the outside world from there was when you go for a drive to the court, when you're going to courts, or yelling out to people at the top of your lungs to the other young people at the school next door.
And just to refresh, what age were you at Aranda House?
I think I went in there either just when I turned 12 or 11 for the first time.
Well, I want to ask you some more questions about life in detention, and I just want to go through some really basic sorts of concepts like water and food and access to things like toiletries. So can we do it in that sort of structure for the moment? Can we start with access to water when you've been in custody, because this is something that you've addressed at different stages in your statement. For example, at paragraph 178, you talk about the Alice Springs Youth Detention Centre and the access to water there. Can you take a look at that and just tell the commissioners about the way in which you could get water at that centre?
Yeah, so in the rooms there was no toilet or water in there. And to be able to get water, we'd have to press the button and have to wait until they come down. Sometimes that'd be 20 minutes, sometimes they wouldn't come down for a couple of hours and then let us out. We'd have to walk into the bathroom. That's a separate room, which got the bathroom, and get water out of the water bubbler from there, walk in, say have a mouthful, and then walk back in.
And you've spoken about water at Don Dale between paragraphs 182 to 187.
Yes.
Remembering, if you can, that for today's purposes, we're not mentioning the names of any of the individuals who've had their names blacked out of the statement. Can you tell us about the difficulties that you encountered with water at Don Dale?
So, for an instance, there was a time in the BMU, not far from the tear gassing incident, where an officer, a youth justice officer, walked in and gave everyone else water. And because that officer didn't really like me, he said, "Do you want water, Voller?" And I said, "Yes." And then as he was walking out, he threw it out and threw water onto the ground. As he was walking out, said, "There you go," and walked off.
And if we can just come back a step, that was a specific occasion, but just as a general proposition, was there water or toilets in the cells? Can you just describe the way it was set up?
Yeah. So there was toilets in them, but there was no water except for the two end cells, which is 4 and 5. But the water was disgusting. Yeah, I wouldn't have even drank that water.
Can we just go back a step, and we were going to address this later on, but at the old Don Dale, there were, I think, what you've called normal cells in paragraph 182. But there was also the BMU and the HSU as well, is that right?
Yeah.
Maybe you could just explain the difference between those now.
Well, the normal cells were pretty similar to how I explained the Alice Friggins Juvenile Detention Centre. They had no toilets, no water, and then they had a window, that's it. And some, at different stages, at one stage there was only 2 beds per room, and then they ended up putting bunk beds in there so they could fit 4 people into a room. And the same thing, you'd have to press the button and wait to be able to go to the toilet or to get water. And then in the HSU is kind of like an at-risk cell where they do have a toilet and a water bubbler in the HSU.
Okay. So were you telling us first about the normal cells, then about HSU, and then in the BMU, as you say, in 182, there were toilets but no water, is that right?
Yeah, except for the last 2 cells, 4 and 5, had water taps.
Okay, and it was in the BMU where that specific incident that you just talked about where you were offered some water, accepted, but it was thrown on the ground. That was in the BMU, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Well, since we're at that part of your statement, at paragraph 188, you also talk about difficulties that you encountered with food and the fact that you felt that you were punished by not being given food, is that right?
Yes, correct.
Can you tell the commissioners about that?
It happened a couple of times throughout my time in detention, but...
Again, sorry, remembering we're not mentioning particular names.
Yeah. So yeah, it happened a couple of times throughout my time in detention where I'd be abusive, or like I'd swear because I was angry because I was being kept in a cell, and I'd be swearing at officers and stuff like that. And because I was swearing, they'd punish me, and they wouldn't give me dinner, and I'd have to wait till like the next day, or they wouldn't give me breakfast or lunch, just depending on what time of day it was. And then there was one instance where a youth justice officer, seeing how hungry I was in the middle of the night, he was on night shift, and he'd come around at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and chucked muesli bars and fruit through the hatch and said, "Yeah, eat," and made me some toast, I think it was, because he could see how hungry I was. And he just didn't agree with what they did by starving me, I guess.
There was the opportunity, was there, to get some additional items when you're in custody as part of what was called the token economy, is that right?
Yes.
Can you just explain to the commissioners what that was and how it worked?
Well, in the Don Dale Centre, when I first started going, they had a system where they'd have different groups of how much money you could earn in a day. So they'd have 20s, 50s, and 70s as excellent good behaviour, okay behaviour, and 0s if you were non-compliant. So, and they had about 3 or 4 different sessions that they'd tick, and the officers would tick it. So all up, I think the maximum you could earn is about $4.50 or something a day, and then they'd take $1.50 off us every day for rent.
Sorry, they charged you rent
Yeah, they'd take $1.50 off the money that we made every day, $1.50.
as a rent for staying in Dondale.
Yes.
Okay, go on.
So with things like that, depending on what classification level you want, so green shirts and blue shirts, they could buy stuff like Walkmans, stuff like that, listen to CDs so they can listen to music, and stuff like hats, singlets, jocks, shoes, and clothes to put in their property for when they get out, hats, and conditioners, shampoos, just normal like hygiene stuff, deodorant, and just stuff like that.
And you mentioned underwear. That was a concern for you too. Can you explain that?
Well, if you don't buy your own underwear, the only other underwear you've got choice wearing is the underwear that everyone else wears. It just gets washed, and then you pick out another pair, it gets washed and picked out, and that goes through all of the males in Dondale.
So you didn't have your own underwear?
Not unless you could buy it.
Unless you could buy it as part of this economy.
Yes.
But
Can I just ask you this? It's a very trivial question, of course. If you actually were able to buy your own undies, how did you manage to keep them from the common pool?
Yeah, you had to take the risk of someone else getting them. Some people just write their name on them, and hopefully they can grab them back out of the washing pile before someone else does. Eventually they introduced a system where they'd have a wash bag. So they'd give some people a wash bag where you can put your clothes in there and then tie it up and then chuck that whole bag into the wash and then get it back.
That's not only that's pretty standard fare at boarding schools.
Yeah, but even with that wash bag, because it's all in that tiny bag, all cramped together, the clothes and that don't really get washed properly.
Righto.
But if you didn't have a wash bag, you just had to get what you were given.
Yeah.
By or if you didn't have your own underwear, you just had to wear.
Yeah.
Whatever came back. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, that's a fairly private sort of a thing, and might lead us on to the topic of privacy generally when you were in custody. Can you talk us through any issues you may have had with things like toilets or showers? I know, for example, at paragraph 179, you make reference to a toilet incident at the Alice Springs Youth Detention Centre. Have you got other things to say about toilets at that centre or elsewhere?
Yeah. There was one instance where I was in an isolation placement at Alice Springs Detention Centre, and I was busting to go to the toilet. I'd been asking for it, I think at least 4 or 5 hours. They'd just been saying no. And I ended up having to defecate into a pillowcase because they wouldn't let me out to go to the toilet. And then eventually when I got let out the next morning, I was able to chuck that pillowcase out. And there's been other times where I've had to urinate out the door, out the back window, and even in just normal rooms because they haven't been able to come down.
Were you aware of other detainees having the same sorts of problems?
Yeah, especially the main ones was urinating out the back window or into water bottles and then chucking them out, like the drink bottles, and then chucking them out the next day.
Was that something you were aware of on more than one occasion?
Yes, plenty of times.
Okay. What about, and that's something you tell us about Alice Springs, but if you've had difficulties with this sort of thing in custody anywhere, do let us know. What about showering? Have there been issues with privacy in showering when you've been in detention?
With the showers in Dondale, there was 4 showers in one bathroom, and they were all facing each other with no doors, no nothing, and at all times there would be an officer in there just watching everyone shower. So a youth justice officer would be in there watching it. And even with the toilets, all the doors had been taken off the cubicles for the toilets. So you just sat and the officers would watch you while you're on the toilet. And even for young people going, it's scary that someone's watching you when you're going to the toilet or when you're having a shower.
Well, can that lead us to the topic that you've addressed certainly at paragraph 113 and perhaps elsewhere, of strip searching. Can you tell us, Mr. Voller, how old were you when you were first strip searched?
When I first went in there, so it would have been either late 11 or early 12.
And when you were strip searched at that age, who was there?
There'd be 2 male officers.
Just the prison officers, no one else? Or the youth justice
The youth
officers,
justice
I'm sorry?
officers, yeah.
Did you understand what was going on?
No.
Did anyone explain to you why this had to happen?
Only when I got older I realised why it was happening, but the first year of me going in and out, I didn't really know what it was for, why.
And no one told you?
No.
So you're perhaps 12 years old, there's no one you know there, there's no explanation. Tell us what happened in those circumstances. What did they actually do?
They'd come in, they'd tell you to strip all your clothes off, you'd take all your clothes off, and then they wouldn't let you cover your private parts. They'd tell you have to put your arms up in the air and turn your arms up and down, show under your armpits, pull your ears back, and then put your finger in your mouth and run your finger around your gums, and then poke your tongue out, and then run your fingers through your hair, and then turn around, lift one foot up, lift the other foot up, and then squat and cough.
And was that the standard procedure that happened every time?
Yeah, most of the time. Sometimes it would just change. Sometimes they'd left some of it out.
Well, how often would that sort of thing happen to you?
Every time after a visit, every time you go to court, every time you come back from court, or to the hospital or doctor's appointments, or every time you leave the centre and come back. And after every family visit or just private visit, and when you get placed at risk, and in my case sometimes even when you're put into isolation, or even I was getting strip searched when I was on management plans.
What can you just elaborate on that a bit? What's the significance of that?
So I was on a management plan where I had to stay in isolation, and because I kept taking paper back into my cell to block the camera, every time I'd go to the toilet, they'd make me strip search after coming out of the toilet, and they'd also stand there 2 metres away and watch me while I was on the toilet. And then when I walk out, they'd make me strip search, and then again they'd do another pass search before I get into my cell, and then put me back into my cell.
So you're strip searched every time you go to the toilet?
Yeah, at one stage, yes.
And
Can you remember, when you say at one stage, can you remember about how old you were during that period?
I think it would have been in 2011 at Alice Springs Juvenile Detention Centre.
Thanks. Was it confined to that time and that place?
Yeah, because it was around this same time as I mentioned before. I had to defecate in a pillowcase, because it was around the same time as that incident. Yeah.
Thanks.
And were there any other measures taken? I think I'll start that again. I think you said you'd do things with toilet paper, is that right? Would cover the cameras or something like that,
Yeah.
Is that right? So were there other measures taken to prevent you from accessing toilet paper?
Yeah, when I'd go to the toilet, they'd only rip off 5 tiny little squares of toilet paper and say that's all you're getting. And they'd done that quite a bit, even in the BMUs in Dondale. No matter what, even if we weren't blocking the camera, they'd just put out 5 little sheets and say that's all you're getting, make it last. So they wouldn't actually give us enough toilet paper.
When you say they, you're talking about
Yeah, youth justice officers.
And where would they be when they were handing you the toilet paper? Would they be
outside of the door, passing it through the Judas Hatch.
Right. Okay. Well, moving from the issue of privacy, can we address the topic of your education while you're in custody. And can we start with the positives? Because you did have at least one good experience in Don Dale with a tutor, is that correct?
Yeah.
And I think that's paragraph 67 if you're looking for it in your statement, but I think you can probably tell us about it anyway. There's no problem with naming him and telling us why that was a good experience.
Yeah. Well, at one stage in Don Dale, they had me on a management plan where I'd go to school, and because since I was young, I've always had problems with concentrating in school. And so they put me on a one-on-one session with a young Indigenous man, Harold Calmo, who was working in Don Dale as a youth worker, but at the same time, they'd have me tutoring with him. And so he'd help me out tutoring, and at the same time help me out with my work and just help me out with my behaviour altogether in Don Dale as a tutor.
Did you ever have an experience like that again?
No, after that, the only other one-on-one experience I had was when they put me on management plans and they'd confine me. I wasn't allowed to integrate with any other people, detainees at Don Dale, and they'd have me one-on-one with a youth worker.
Yeah, that's not the sort of one-on-one you're talking about here, is it? Because you're talking about actual schoolwork with Harold?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And you responded well to it and enjoyed it?
Yeah.
You also speak positively in your statement about a visit from Larrakia Nation.
Yeah.
You want to explain what was good about that visit?
Yeah, well, it was good because it's a good program for like all the young fellas in Don Dale. There wasn't many programs coming through, and it was one of the only cultural programs that came through Don Dale. So for them to come in with some elders, I think it was from Good Island and communities like that, they did smoking ceremonies and stuff like that, and it was good for us to be able to talk to people on the outside and talk to them about stuff that's happening on the outside and not only see people that's in jail.
So there were a couple of positive things that you do recall. Can I ask you this though, do you accept that you might have made things difficult for your teachers while you were in detention?
Yes.
You want to just explain that?
Well, it wasn't like I was doing it on purpose, it was just something I could control my behaviour with concentrating and stuff like that, but I do admit that could have been hard with them teaching in that situation that it was in a group, because I was sometimes too embarrassed to ask for help because I wasn't that good at working out like algebra and stuff like that. But when I could ask, because there were so many people in that classroom, then sometimes they couldn't around getting to help, so I'd just stop working and I'd just sit there.
And when you say it wasn't on purpose, do you mean it's not like you woke up in the morning and thought, I'll be disruptive in class today?
Yeah.
But something would happen and you'd react accordingly?
Yeah.
But is it the case that, be that as it may, you actually did want to learn?
Yes, correct.
What did you actually want to do and why?
Well, for the 2 years before I came over here, I was asking to try and get my Year 10 certificate and to try and do as many programs over there as I could, as possible to get qualifications. But when I was asking for the Year 10, all they'd say is, here's some match sheets, you're not welcome at school, here's a few match sheets you can do in your cell. And they'd just give me some paperwork and that's it. But they wouldn't actually let me go back to school and participate in actual education.
And what would you like to, well, you've mentioned your certificate, but what would you like to have achieved? What?
Better education outcomes, and stuff like white cards, stuff like that could help me out with when I get out, even helping with resume writing, stuff like that's going to help me for when I get out of Don Dale to be able to progress in society and get a job or training.
So, and what is the state of your formal education?
Most of my education is self-taught, so I can read and write, but it's not good with algebra and stuff like that.
But that hasn't been done as part of a formal
No,
education program.
not since when I was about 10 years old was my last proper schooling.
Well, the topic of education in custody leads to the topic of case management in custody and also your contact with the Department of Children and Families while you're in custody. And once again, let's start with the good stuff, because on the topic of case management, for example, you do give credit to some individuals. At paragraph 169 of your statement, you name some people who were good to you, and if you ever need the opportunity to just pause and take a look at the paragraphs that I'm referring to, just say so, there's no hurry. At paragraph 169, you mention some names there and give them real credit for what they did to you. Can you please elaborate on that and tell us what were the good things?
Those three, Laura King, Ray Morris, Chris Castle, were the only caseworkers that throughout my time in detention would actually take the chance out of the day to actually come and make an effort, talk to us, or try and contact our families to try and make sure that everything's in place for when we get out. Or they'd come down, bring magazines, and there was even times where they'd ask us, is everything okay between using the officers or you and the other fellas in Dondale? They'd try and sort stuff out like that, and they just actually made an effort and actually generally came to work and came to do their job and actually cared about us young people and would actually help us.
And do I understand you to say that part of that was just sitting down and talking with you?
Yeah. So just sit down and have a general conversation and see how we're going.
And is there another aspect of this that you've thought about what would make for a good case management or caseworker, the sorts of things that might be done by them which weren't, you feel, done in your case but that might have helped you more? Engagement with your family, for example?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Oh, like those three were a good example of what a good casework should be, helping us and make stronger relationship with people that are having like problems with their family on the outside, to help them, like when they come to detention or prisons, to be able to do family-based programs in detention with your caseworker where they can mediate programs with your family and them around the table so that you can organise so everyone's on the same plan for when you get out, to help the young person, whoever it is, to get out to succeed. So everyone knows what the plan is to do. So caseworkers should be able to help them enrol in education or schooling for when they get out, or depending on how they go and do training courses, help them get out to do that so they can set that up so when they get out, they're not just let out and they have to go and look for that stuff themselves. They've got that stuff already there that they can go and do, and they're given an opportunity for when they get out.
And so that's something that's put in place with the family and discussed with real engagement with the family before release. But was that your experience as a general rule?
Like if I experienced that sort of help in there.
Did you have the feeling that caseworkers, or what feeling did you have about some caseworkers, and again, we're not naming anyone, but about the engagement or the attitude that they had towards your family?
They didn't really make an effort to, most of them didn't make an effort to make sure the family relationships are strong, or whether help them come out and visit or help book visits, stuff like that. And they just didn't really care. They just come to work so they could get paid and go home. They didn't really care about what was happening with the young people in there.
And did some of them speak with you about your family at all?
Yeah, I think I had one caseworker that I remember was saying that my family didn't really care about me and stuff like that.
How did that make you feel?
For a long time, I started believing it, I guess. And then Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to take a break?
That's right.
You all right? You now know, of course, that's not true, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. You've got family supporting you here today.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Can I move to the topic of, I'll come back to that. Can we move to the topic of transfers? Because one thing about being in custody was the fact that you could be transferred between detention centres, is that right?
Yeah.
And you speak about it generally at paragraphs 115 and 116 through to 126, but also at paragraph 208. And I was going to ask you to speak in particular. We've all read your statement. We understand your general concerns. You might just speak to your general concerns about transfers first, and then I'll ask you to speak about that specific incident and a particular transfer.
With transfers, you didn't really have a say. Most of the time, they just wake you up in the morning and say you're getting on a plane, you're going up to Darwin, or the day after, or the day before that says you got to ring your family. And if you're lucky, you can have one last visit before you go. Most of the time, it wasn't even like that. It was just woken up that morning and said you're going, and you couldn't have that last visit with your family, and you had no way of telling them like you didn't want to get transferred away because you have no. Most of us Alice Springs fellows who would get transferred up and down, we had no family up and down, so we had no one that could visit us, and it was hard for family to be able to get funds to fly all the way up to Darwin just to be able to visit us and then fly back. And on different occasions it'd be different. So sometimes you'd go on a Qantas plane with 2 officers, or sometimes you'd go on a charter plane and like 6 or 7 of you would get transferred up at once. Or on some occasions you'd get put in a car.
Well, the particular occasion that I'm going to ask you to speak about next was one that involved a car or a vehicle, is that correct?
Correct.
Can you tell us about that one?
Well, it was just after I'd been put in adult prison for 3 days, and I was seeing a psychiatrist that time, Darryl Murdoch. And some of the higher up people in corrections asked him for a report, and in the report he put that it'd be better off for me to stay in Alice Springs so I can continue working with him and having relationships with my family. And so when I got taken over to adult prison, there was people telling him that I wasn't going to get transferred to Darwin and I'd just be going back to Alice Springs Detention Centre. And then on the 3rd day of me being in the adult facility, they've just woke me up at 6 o'clock in the morning and said, "Get up because you're going." I said, "Going where?" "Going back to detention centre." They said, "No, you're going down." And then I've refused first, and they came back in 15 minutes and then walked me out. Still left me handcuffed and put me in the back of a van and said, "You're going up down." And they put a tiny little hot, I think it was 350 mils or something like that, tiny hot chocolate milk and a disgusting sandwich under the thing. They said, "That's for your road trip." But I didn't even want the sandwich. I chucked the sandwich out. I said, I don't want it. And they left me handcuffed and they started driving. And at that stage I was threatening self-harm because I was hoping that if I went at risk they wouldn't continue to drive. So I was choking myself with seatbelts, stuff like that. And they kept driving. I got about an hour into the trip and again I was busting for the toilet. There was no toilet and had no water. And they said, "To tell you what, we'll open this," because at the back there's a cage and then there's a door. So they opened the door and said, "You go to the toilet through the cage and chuck whatever you need out," and stuff like that. And so all the way from that continued in the back of that car, all the way from Alice Springs to Tennant Creek, and I had the 2 youth justice officers smoking the whole way up, and they smoked a lot of cigarettes, and that smoke as a non-smoker made me sick, made me get a headache, and I was vomiting in the back of the car. And I got that sick, I was dizzy. And I got that sick that I ended up just vomiting. And I just couldn't get up. I was just laying down on the chair. I was trying to break the chair so I could at least make it flat because it's only a small space. of the area that I was in. And with me, there was no windows that I could, on the sides that I could look at or I could put down where there's cage, so I couldn't get any air. And there was no aircon in the back, no water bottles or anything that I could drink.
So what sort of vehicle was it?
Commissioner, can I ask you to take a look at Annexure 34? We don't have that, we haven't tendered the annexures yet, but you should have a copy, or we can answer that question straight away by providing you with a copy. There's just a technical hitch with the...
Set aren't here, Mr. Callaghan.
we might hand up the other photos as well. I might just hand up for your benefit now. They'll be available to everybody in due course, but just to deal with Commissioner Gooder's immediate concern. Yeah, well, just the ones of the vehicle and is that, oh, it's on both sides, I'm sorry. For the record, I'm handing to the Commissioner one page from Annexure 34 to Mr. Voller's statement, and it has the reference numbers 0747 and 0748 on each side, and it'll answer the question directly.
So what was the seating like in the back of the van?
I think if you squashed up, you could fit 3 people in, and it wasn't actually, it's not made, but it's just made for taking people into court and taking them back. But even for then, on the trip from Alice Springs Detention Centre to the courthouse is long, and it's hot, so you don't get aircon at the back. You don't get any, there's no windows you put down, so you can't get any air to come in.
So where were they transferring you from Alice Springs to
Darwin, but...
So how long is...
What happened was the Alice Springs Detention Centre youth workers drove me from Alice Springs to Tennant Creek, left me at the Tennant Creek watch house for the night, and then just my luck, I had 2 good officers that ended up coming down from Dondale, picking me up to drive me the rest of the way.
So I've driven that road, it's about 15 hours if you did it straight.
And the only exercise I got in between the time was I'd stop at the police watch houses. I was allowed to get out, go to the toilet, and eventually, and then go back. But there's no watch houses between Alice Springs and Tennant Creek.
Thank you.
What do you want us to do with this?
Look, in the interests of consistency, I might just tender that as a separate exhibit, if that's all right, and then...
Yes, otherwise it's a piece of evidence that's not really accounted for. Is that 49? Exhibit 49. And it's it looks as though it's some video footage. Is that what you understand it to be?
Sorry, could we get the witness to see that, because it relates, it's not, as I understand it, taken...
Is it simply to demonstrate what the vehicle was rather than anything else?
I think the witness might know a little bit more about it than that.
Yeah, so it's just a picture of that car, the exact same car that I was driven up in, but this is 3 days earlier when I'd got taken from Alice Springs Detention Centre. This, I think, on the same night with the incident with the restraint chair, that I'd been placed at the Alice Springs Correctional Centre. This is when they were transferring me over from there to the Correctional Centre.
So that depicts you in that
Yeah, that's
picture?
me in the back of the car. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
So it's not the 8th of March, but it's close to that time and the same vehicle that we're talking
This
about.
is 3 days before.
Yes, okay, thank you. As part of the story, I think you indicated you had to defecate in your shirt, is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Did you have another shirt?
No.
So you remained shirtless for the balance of the trip?
Yeah.
You said a moment ago that the trip was completed and it was just your luck that there were 2 good officers who took charge of that. What do you mean by 2 good officers? What made them 2 good officers?
It was 2 officers I won't name because I don't know if they're still working there and I don't want them to get in trouble.
No, let's not name them.
broke a few
Just
rules.
what did they do that...
There was a few road stops where they stopped and they just opened the side of the car and just let me sit there because they knew I wasn't going to run. They knew I wasn't going to do anything, and they had trusted me because I've known them for a while, and they've just sat there with the door open and just had a conversation with me had stopped at a road stop. They've gone into the shops, bought me like Gatorade, stuff like that. And they also, like when they picked me up from the watch house, there was like an esky, big bag in the back of the van. When they picked me up, there was a bag, I think it was like 3 Gatorades and a big bag of family like chips, stuff like that, and food. And so they actually gave me stuff in the back of the van. And then again at Catherine, when they pulled up at Catherine, they ran into McDonald's, bought me McDonald's, and actually bought me food and made sure I was alright. In the back, turned the radio on, turned the aircon on, and actually had a conversation with me as I was driving up, and didn't shift me right to the back of the van where there was nothing. They put me in the second part of the van so they could still talk to me and stuff through the cage.
So there's a bit of a contrast with the first half. Well, that probably leads to the next topic, which was one where I was going to ask you about the different types of treatment that you received in detention, and flowing on nicely from that, can you tell us some more about some of the good things that you experienced from staff in detention centres? Because you do say, don't you, that there were some good staff in detention centres.
Yeah.
You've named a couple.
Yeah.
Apart from maybe getting you a Gatorade or something like that, do you see another situation where it's important to look at the way in which staff in a youth detention centre reacts with a detainee's family?
Yeah, so for example, there's a few times when my family would come in and there was a certain couple of officers in Alice Springs Detention Centre that would actually say hello to my mum and my sister, and say hello to my little brothers and sisters, and like muck around with them and just be able to say hello and not be like rude, and get to know my family when they come in and stuff like that as well. And make sure to see if they wanted water or a cup of tea or need to be able to go to the toilet, stuff like that.
And how did you feel when you saw your family being treated like that?
It made me have a good relationship with the officers, a really good relationship with the officers that looked after my family, because I knew they weren't coming, like they didn't think that they just had power and they could treat my family no good, because at the end of the day, they're not, my family's not in there, they shouldn't be treated bad.
And again, without mentioning necessarily any names, did you have other experiences where your family weren't treated so well?
I think a couple of different times with officers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that leads to the topic of bad treatment, and you've made in your statement you've offered in your statement a number of examples of specific incidents, and they're all detailed in your statement. I'm thinking of paragraphs 123, 204, 206, 207, 214. We don't have to go through them. You've said in your statement the things that happened. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
And they all involve specific people. And again, for the moment, I'm not going to dwell on that. But what I want to get you to speak about now is the treatment you received, generally, you say, in the behaviour management system that operates. Can you start, first of all, by just telling the Commissioners about the behaviour management system? It seemed to revolve around shirts, is that right?
Yeah. So there's different classifications, and each classification would have a different coloured shirt. For example, you'd have high security would be red, orange would be medium, green low 1 and blue low 2. And
as a rule, what security rating were you?
I'd say about 95% of my time I was always in a red shirt.
Were you, do you know, were you regarded as an escape risk?
They do have that rating on me, but I've never tried to escape, and to be honest, I wouldn't escape.
Never attempted it?
No. I have previously jumped on a roof before, but it was never the intention to escape or do anything like that.
Well, how did your rating, how did the colour of your shirt affect your progress in the detention system or the way in which you lived your life in detention?
It affected me because all the programs that did end up occasionally coming in, I could never engage in. I could never had the opportunity to do those programs.
Because you were high?
Yep. And I couldn't go around and run out, go down like in Dondo. I couldn't go down and run around on the oval. I couldn't do stuff like that.
Well, how would you move up and down the classifications?
From my understanding, from what I've noticed in Dondo, is depending on who you are, what happens with your classification. So for people like myself and a number of other detainees who have behaviour problems in there, and like when they behave, they say, "Oh yeah, you're doing good," but when it comes to classification, they don't recommend it because they've had 1 or 2 incident reports for not making, even just little things like not making your bed or swearing, and so that affects you a lot depending on your past and how you behaved in there.
Did it depend upon which particular youth justice officer was making the call? Was there consistency?
No, definitely not. And it only takes one officer to write something on the computer that's not true to wreck your chances at going up or changing classifications.
You now know, of course, don't you, having been in the adult system, you know a bit more about the way the classification system in adult detention works.
Yeah.
Are there some differences or some things you know now that you didn't know then, for example, about whether it was possible to review decisions that people made that might affect your classification?
Yeah, so one of the caseworkers that was at Don Dale actually told me one time, because my behaviour was good and I was supposed to get into a low security, and he recommended I got put into low security, but the bosses at that time said, no, we want to test him for another 6 weeks. And so they said no, and then he came up to me one time and said, I'm telling you this off the record, he said to me, and he said, you know you can appeal for your classification to be up, to have it changed, because your behaviour has been good and we think you should get low security, but they just won't agree with us. But when I did ask the management team, they said there's no such thing as an appeal.
And do you know now whether that was the case or not?
Yeah, from what I was told, there was an appeal system there that we could ask to get the circumstances of why we can't, and ask that our classification would get changed.
And if there was an appeal system, who would speak on behalf of the young person?
From what I was told, either your caseworker could, or you could ask to have a meeting with the general manager or someone to talk to him about why you think you should be changed from a high security classification or whatever classification you're in.
You don't recall being aware of that possibility or those possibilities?
No.
I suppose the ultimate tool in the hands of staff was the use of isolation as something that they could impose. You were held in isolation at Alice Springs Youth Detention Centre, at the old Dondale and at the new Dondale, is that right?
Correct.
Can we start with the Alice Springs Youth Detention Centre? Can you just describe the physical layout of the isolation cells? You may have touched on this already, but can you just remind us if you did?
So it's just a tiny little cell with a little air vent at the bottom of the ground, but from the outside the officers have like glued cardboard to the outside so you can't see out that air vent. And there was a window at the back, but they've drilled concrete slabs into that window so you can't see out the back windows. And there's aircon, and on the outside of the door they've drilled metal plates in so they can shut those windows, how you can't look out the window, so you can't see who's walking past or who's banging on your window or who's turning your light on and off. And there was a light that could be only turned on from the outside, as well as CCTV, and that's all. There was no bed frames. It was just, you got a mattress on the floor. That's it.
Well, can I ask about two aspects of that? You say there was, it was air conditioned.
Yes.
Was there ever a downside to that?
There was a time where they left me in there with no clothes, no mattress, no sheets, no nothing for the period of the whole night. And they, from what I feel, they turned the aircon on full blast. I was freezing all night. I was pressing the button, actually crying, asking for a blanket, asking for a sheet, because I was that cold. My skin was all going all wrinkly and I was shivering.
And just to recap on that a moment, you say you were in there with no clothes and no mattress or anything. Presumably there was an incident before that which led to you being put in there in that condition. Would that be a fair assumption?
And they would have been due to either ripping up the mattress or ripping up my sheets.
Right, so you'd done something that they would say was something wrong?
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like perhaps something that was wrong. There was probably a trigger for that as well. If we could keep going back, there'd be a story behind it. Would that be right?
Right.
But whatever the story was, you've told us what happened. Did anyone check with you at any stage about the air temperature or whether you needed anything to keep you warm?
No. And just on that, at some stages, there was a punishment, as a punishment for them to take our mattress and our clothes. For example, if we'd block our camera, they'd take our mattress or they'd take our clothes. Or at one instance, if you got kicked out of school, they'd send you back to the cell, take all the mattresses and everything out, so when you're in the cell, you don't get to lay down and be comfortable.
So, Mr. Voller, when
Yes.
they took your clothes, so you, even
Yeah, everything.
You were naked.
Yeah. I remember one more clearly than that, where they left me with just a mattress and nothing else. No clothes, no jocks, and nothing, and I ended up trying to wrap myself up in the mattress because it was a foam mattress, and I was trying to wrap myself up with the mattress.
And you say that the removal of a bed or something like that was actually used as a punishment, not as a safety measure or anything. It was actually something that was part of a punishment that was being imposed.
Because now being aware, I know there's some circumstances where they need to take stuff out when there is incidents like self-harming and stuff, but through my time I've got a lot of stuff taken out just because, like for example, pressing the button and swearing at officers, then they'd come down and say, if you don't stop swearing, we're going to take the mattress, and they'd take all my mattresses out, they'd take the sheets out, they'd take everything out and leave me in there. Most of the time when they'd do that, be for 2 or 3 hours, sometimes 4 hours, and sometimes even till the next day.
And you mentioned before the fact that the light switch was on the outside.
Yeah.
Was there a problem with that at any stage?
Yeah, certain officers would purposely walk past, turn the light on, and leave the light on all night so that you couldn't sleep. So the light would be bright, and that happened to me a lot of times.
No one would check whether you wanted it switched off or not?
Even when I'd asked for it to be turned on, they said, no, we're not turning it off.
So you'd spend a whole night with the light on?
Correct.
Commissioners, I was just about to move to the topic of isolation at Don Dale, which starts another chapter.
Yes,
Would that
that's
be an
okay.
appropriate time?
Yes, it would. Thanks, Mr. Callaghan.